The year is 133 AD. The place? Along the northernmost periphery of the Roman Empire. Roman Britannia. A young Roman legionnaire mans his post on Hadrian's Wall. This was an imposing stone wall, stretching 80 miles across Britannia from the North Sea right across to the Irish Sea. Built by the Romans a decade earlier at the behest of Roman Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian's Wall is designed to guard against incursions into the empire by the barbarians who inhabit the northern fringes of the British Isles. What today is northern England and Scotland. The young legionnaire hails from the north of Hispania, commonly known in today's world as Spain. This duty assignment in northern Britannia is so remote, so alien, that it makes the young, inexperienced legionnaire feel as though he is beyond the pale of civilization. He may as well be on the edge of the earth. He nervously casts his eyes out across the windswept, mysterious, foreboding landscape to the north, waiting, watching, and hoping to catch a glimpse of one of these so-called barbarians, who perhaps has ventured within eyeshot of Hadrian's Wall. Hastings County Sasquatch, Ontario Sasquatch, along with Upper Canada's Sasquatch research teams, have embraced a great idea put forth by the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. And in the coming months of 2024, these three Ontario-based groups will be constructing and deploying its own version of what we will dub Hadrian's Wall North Project. With some modifications to the plans in order to suit difficult terrain, tree species, topography, along with known directions of travel of our target species within the working group study area. This is a remote region of central Ontario that lies within the Boreal Shield ecozone that we have referred to as MOAD in our reports. It is this location where we have continued to be successful in documenting the presence of a species for which science presently has assigned no taxon. Hadrian's Wall North project will not be constructed of stones and mortar. It comprises a number of modified, state-of-the-art camera traps laid out in a formidable but concealed and surreptitious layered grid pattern that will stretch some 400 meters west to east and some 30 to 40 meters north to south. These cameras are designed to capture multiple photo images or videos without the aid of infrared light or flash photography. We are optimistic our camo cameras will capture valuable data on anything or anyone who ventures into its ever-vigilant network of motion detection camera traps. We, too, hope to catch an image of barbarians, or as we refer to them, Sasquatch. Also known historically in eastern Canada as Yellowtop, Janoskwa, or Wild Man. Our images, should we be so fortunate to obtain them, just like our colleagues south of the border in the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, will also be collected and shared with the world. Like and subscribe to all three groups in order to keep abreast on the latest updates on Hadrian's Wall North, along with the latest field reports coming from our respective channels going into 2024.
This episode is sponsored by Project Overwatch, a GoFundMe initiative to put professional thermal drones in the hands of Ontario Sasquatch researchers, thus enabling them to gather information in the field from above in a less intrusive way, where difficult terrain, forest density, and impassable watercourses prevent in-person on-the-ground investigation. If you would like to contribute to this initiative or find out more about Project Overwatch, there's a link in the description below to the Project GoFundMe page.
And we're back. We're talking with the one and only David Willbanks out of southeast Oklahoma. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Never been down there.
And so he's going to give us hell for mispronouncing things. Kiamichi.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
We get it.
Kiamichi.
Yeah, all right. We did it. Good.
Points.
And Dave's also an author, too. He also has the book.
Yeah, I've got 2 books. I've written 2 books. They're both available on Amazon.
The subject of Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Bigfoot more. I had a chance to go over some of your YouTube page. Notice that you talk about a lot of historical accounts, such as some of the British Columbia one. Of course, I was looking for Canada stuff because that's where we are. We're up in Ontario, Canada.
Right.
And it's neat to see that how many reports do you seem to get from people around that area in a month?
Really, I don't seek out reports from Canada. Matter of fact, the stuff from Canada that I've talked about on my YouTube are, like you say, pretty much just historical accounts from up, around British Columbia and such. And that's usually because there's some interesting accounts from up there regarding, like the abduction of a native girl from back around 100 years ago when it was impregnated by one of these creatures. And that kind of alludes to them being more than what some people think. They're just an undiscovered ape. Yeah. Because if they could abduct a human female and impregnate them, they would have to be closer to us. They'd have to be in the same, or at least a very light category before that could happen. So usually when I talk about the Canadian reports, it's, more to try to add a different angle to what these creatures might actually be. But the reports that I investigate or have in the past are generally from here in Oklahoma.
Yeah, there's a particular report that I know that you investigated, which was over by a casino out your way, which I thought was pretty interesting. There was supposed to be some footage floating around regarding security cameras, but that sort of disappeared, unfortunately.
Well, I don't know that it was ever floating around. Matter of fact, if I had not investigated that one personally and seen the video there, shortly after it was taken, I probably wouldn't even believe the report. It's a little too fantastical. But no, that's actually took place on a tribal land, a casino about a 3-hour drive north and west from where I live down here. It's more western Oklahoma, nearer the town of El Reno, actually. And at that particular time, I was doing some I was never a member of the BFRO, but at that time, keep in mind, this was like 99 or 2000 back then, so 24 years ago. I was one of the contact for them here. And one of the guys there, I believe it was Matt, actually sent me an email or called me. I don't remember exactly now, but got in touch with me about that. And at first I said, hey, that's out on the prairie. There wouldn't be a Bigfoot up there, And I was like, well, I'm not going to drive all the way up there. But he said, well, they say they've got some security video of this thing trying to get into a grease trap out back. And so I said, well, I'll make the drive then.
Okay.
And I was the first one on scene, and I met a gentleman up there, and he kind of showed me around a few places, handed me a clump of hair that was supposedly from a Sasquatch that they'd got off of a briar limb. You know what a briar is? Not a briar.
Cockleburr?
Yeah, bodark tree.
Okay.
You know what a bodark tree, they call it? That's what we call it down here. It's a hardwood. They make bows out of it. The natives used to make bows. But anyway, it's a real hardwood, and they also call it Osage orange. Some people do, but anyway, it's got some really stout thorns on it. It's a hardwood. I use it to make fence posts out of, because they last forever. But anyway, and that hair, I'd given it. There was another gentleman that came up there. He got there after I did, named Roger. Interesting, but it really looked like human hair, like long black human hair. So anyway, I didn't hear anything what came of that. So my suspicion, it looked like human hair to me. The texture and everything felt like that. But anyhow, I gave that to Roger. I assume he sent it to the BFRO, and I never heard anything more about it. So that probably wasn't anything that interesting. But like I said, never heard anything more about that. But the footage itself, this area is a few miles north of the North Canadian River there, which there have been sighting reports along that river dating back at least to the late 1960s, early 1970s, which what they were calling the Chicken Man. And simply because there's reports of this thing getting into some farmers' chicken pens and it's taking their chickens. So it's very close to that area, and there is a wooded area near that, even though it is kind of on the prairie, that has a lot of natural springs in it, and there's a lot of deer and other wildlife, hanging around there, plus the river, and those springs and the rivers probably a good mile from where the casino was. So anyway, they let me and Roger and one other guy, I cannot recall his names. He was a friend of Roger's that was with him, and he wasn't a Bigfoot guy. He just, came along. He was just a friend of Roger's. But they let us into the security room and let us see the footage that they had captured. And what it was, I've heard some people call it a dumpster, and this thing, one person saying, yeah, this video showed this thing run up and grab a bag of trash out of the dumpster and run off. Well, that's not what the footage was. Yes, it looks like a dumpster, but it's a grease trap where they would take the old cooking grease out and they would pour it in this, but the top had a smaller square lid on it they could lift up and pour the grease in. And it was under a light pole that kind of come around the top, bit down over the top of it. And what the footage they let us see was only a few seconds, but you could see this thing walk into the light, basically, and lean kind of over and place its hands on, or one hand anyway, on top of the grease trap, like it's grabbing the lid to open it. And there was actually this thing's handprint was in the top of the grease, and it had very wide fingers. That's what was left in the grease was the fingers themselves, and they were very, very wide, probably I'd say a couple inches wide anyway on the fingers. And the interesting thing about that, other than just what was on there, is the way the pole was, we were able to measure up that light pole to how tall this thing was, because it was just, right there. And we were able to measure, this thing was over 9 feet tall, like, between 9.5 feet. And I remember telling Roger, my comment was, I looked over him and says, well, I'll be darned, they really are real. Because, I've been, interested in this my whole life, but up until that point, it was an interesting and fun mystery too, which it still is, to be fair. But that's the first evidence that I saw in person, and I'm like, well, I don't know what else that could be, because I don't know very many 9.5 foot tall people that would put on a hair covered suit and walk under a light pole. Not to mention there were to do what?
And dig some grease out of a trap.
Yeah, well, it didn't get the lid open.
Oh.
At least on that. Like I said, the first thing we saw was as it approached the area of the street light, and this was a security camera. You couldn't tell color in it. It was kind of greenish, black and white. You could really make out that it was hair covered and it was dark color. But I mean, you couldn't tell, was it dark red hair, was it black hair, whatever. We didn't see that. But the first thing you noticed was kind of a little glow appear just to the right, which would have been the north part of that, as it come across that little part of the parking lot. Because we were able to see the footprints. It had crossed from this wooded area about 3/4 mile or so west of there. It had crossed this plowed field to get there. And the tracks it left, they were like 16-inch long, tracks. And it had come across that, stepped over the fence, and then walked up. But that glow, and this is the only part that me and Roger kind of have a differing opinion on what that glow was. I thought it was a street lamp kind of reflecting off the hair on the top of its head. And Roger interpreted it as eye shine, which, that's neither here nor there. That's just the first thing we noticed. And then as it steps under the light pole there, under the light, it kind of materializes into, full view, takes a couple of steps, leans over, and that's where it cut off. And if there's any more than that, that's all that they played for us. And they rewound it and played it over and over for us,
That being there was just scooping the grease out and eating it, you figure? Is that what it was doing?
It was trying to get in it. Now, it had kind of a lock on it, from what I remember. So it was more an attempt to get in it, I think.
I see.
But there had been other people seeing it around there. We had heard that there was some people staying in a bus out there, and it come and looked in the window of that. So yeah, there was kind of a rash of sightings during that time. Now, there's not enough cover in that wooded area for like a group of these to stay there for long. My opinion is they pass through once in a while. So that just happened to be one of those times, and they caught it on video.
Is there much of a creek bottom or something along that area that they
well, there's like I said, just south. Can't tell you exactly how far. I'd say a couple of miles, maybe a mile or two south. You've got the North Canadian River. Gotcha. Those river bottoms there are heavily wooded. They're just very, very heavily wooded. But then around is pretty much prairie with like scrub oak and stuff like that here and there. Now, where it was coming from, though, there's if I was guessing, probably maybe 100 acres of wood there close to a railroad track kind of went through it as well. And it was pretty thick woods there. And there's a pond there. And there's also quite a few natural springs in that area. So
yeah, railroad
would be some good cover.
Railroad tracks. That seems to be a major travel corridor, I imagine.
Well, I mean, possibly.
Okay.
We'd like to hear more from the drivers, actually.
Yeah, the train.
From like the train people?
Yeah, the train engineers.
Yeah, I mean, I would think they would get out of the way as soon as I heard the thing coming.
You'd think, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I was going to ask you, too, is like, when was the last time you were out in the woods as far as doing an investigation on a particular spot in your area?
Now, you can call it an investigation if you want. I call it a good excuse to go camping.
Right on.
But there's some areas that I go to that have had pretty consistent activity over the years. One of them that I go to down in the Kiamichis, I've only invited a couple of people to go with me because it's a consistent area and it's very remote. And the area that's at, if it's not deer season, you just won't really run into people down there. Very, very seldom, you know. But the first time I went to the area that I'm talking about was back in 2002. A guy was riding horseback through this area. This is down in the Kiamichi Mountains. And one of these creatures that walked out in the trail, he stood about 50 yards ahead of him. And he was just sitting on his horse, kind of going along. And he turned and looked over and saw him and ran back into the woods. And this guy doesn't live very far from me. Actually, I didn't know him up to this time. But a neighbor of mine that also breaks horses and stuff said, hey, you know, our friend, he said he saw one of these things up there. So I set up a meeting with him and he told me where it was, described it. Then in, that would have been late 2002, I'd say March, I'd have to look on the cast of the footprint I made, but I believe it's March 17. A close friend of mine here in town, he and I went there to look into that. And it was drizzling rain. And earlier in the night, we were walking from camp, and there was kind of a ridge up above us, and something was tossing pebbles off that ridge. Pebbles, you know. And I was thinking, well, I don't think that's just something rolling down the ridge. It looked like they're landing out here. And my friend Brian Baker's his name. Matter of fact, if you look at my videos, there's a live show with me and Brian. We're sitting here in this. I'm in the back of my music store. This is what I do for a living. We did a show there where we talked about that. But he picked up one of the pebbles and threw it back up the bank. And I just kind of made a joke. I said, hey, if that's really a Bigfoot throwing those, you might not want to get in a rock throwing contest with it. You know? And so, you know, that was about it, you know. And then we got back to camp, you know. Now earlier, though, let me back up a little bit. We were fishing along this creek before dark. Because when I go camping like that, I like to catch my dinner, basically. And something was pacing us in the brush, and it would whistle once in a while, like really kind of strange whistle, like not from the lips, more like from deeper, you know. And we kind of brushed it off. I said, hey, you know, there's somebody messing with us down here, you know, and it could have been. But late that night, after all that, and the other pebbles throwing, it was, and I generally don't sleep in a tent unless it's just blithering cold. Now, what I prefer to do, like here, what me and my friend Brian did, we had a couple of cots, and we put a tarp between the trees to kind of keep the drizzle off of us. That way we still got a field of view around us. And, we went to sleep, and we were both woken up around 2 o'clock in the morning. This loud crash just right outside of camp, probably 20, 25 foot from where we were sleeping. And of course, we got up, went and looked, and something had thrown a rock. I'm remembering guesstimating the rock weighed 25 or 30 pounds and had thrown it against a big oak tree right at the edge of our camp. We could see where it had hit the tree and, took the bark off and then landed at the bottom of it. We didn't sleep the rest of that night, and that's the last thing we heard that night. Now, the next morning, we found indentations in the pine needles that looked like footprints. And then as it got to these indentations, we followed them to this muddy trail. And what looked like in this mud puddle, you could see what looked like a heel print that was filled with some of the water, but the rest of the track was in the water. So I very carefully made a little dam around the area that looked like the print would be. And we used like a whole roll of paper towels, just gently laying them in there and draining it. And we got a pretty decent cast of a footprint out of that. Not huge, about 12 inch long track, but it was that wide, flat, what you think about when you think of Sasquatch tracks. So,
did you get any detail? Like, was there any detail
really.
in it?
No. Not as far as those, because that was underwater.
Or
but
like any dermal
I mean, it's very clearly a humanoid footprint. I mean, the heel is very detailed. But ever since then, I go back every year, usually several times a year, to this area. One of these days, hope to get lucky enough to see what's prowling around up there. But we have had, not November, October of 2022, a friend of mine from Ohio, he's got a YouTube channel called Will Scar Monsters and Mysteries. I don't know if you've looked at his. He does a lot of historical accounts on that. And he came down, and we had a rock thrown into our camp, that night. Not a huge one, probably a baseball size or whatever. And that's I've got a video about that on there as well. But that's my most interesting area that I go to.
Yeah, we're just comparing notes because it sounds like the same activity you guys are getting down in Oklahoma. We're getting the exact same thing up here in Ontario. Pretty much we're hearing anything from whistling to chattering to stone throws,
screams.
Yeah, screams and whoops and what have you too. So I'd imagine you get a wide range of vocals, and you manage to carry a recorder with you at all and record these things?
Okay, now if you want to hear some recordings from one of these trips, go to a YouTube channel called the No Such Thing Podcast.
Yeah, I was just watching
this. Yeah. Okay, a good friend of mine, Cornell Hanratty. He was actually the first podcast I was ever on. He came down and he brought a Zoom audio recorder, and he set it out. And this is the same area that I'm talking about. He set it out in the woods, probably, I want to say 50 foot or more from camp into the woods. Very dense forest there. And of course, when he got home, he said, "Hey, you got to listen to some of this," and he captured a really loud whoop on that. And I'm like, how did we not hear that? It had been when we were asleep. And it's a loud whoop. And he caught some other things on there. I think there's some wood knocks and such. And he's got a video where he plays a lot of that back you can listen to. Now that night, there were 2 nights we stayed there. Cornell come down one time. We didn't have anything like that happen. That would have been in October. Then he come back the following March, and he and I and my son Elijah went down there, and that's when he brought the recorder. And late, it had been after midnight. Like I say, I don't generally sleep in a tent, but it was very cold at night. My son bought a tent, so my son Elijah and I, we were sleeping in one tent. Cornell had his set up very close to ours, and he woke us up yelling very loudly. I can't tell you the exact time, but it was after midnight. yelling at us. He was going, Dave, there's something outside my tent. And of course, I come out of the tent pretty quick. Nothing was there. My first thought, he said, it sounded like a heavy person walked up to the edge of his tent and just stopped. Now, keep in mind, we are a long ways from where anybody could walk up to where we were. And to get to where we were driving, even in my truck, it's got to be a time when it's not real wet or you just can't make it. And you would hear somebody from a long ways off trying to rattle through the obstacles to get there. My first thought was it was a bear because we got black bear down here. But as you being in Ontario would probably scold me for, I did everything wrong with being in a place where there were bears. We had our food left out. We had cooked some things in the skillet. The cooking grease was left out. And you and I both know if it was a bear, what he would have gone straight to, and it wouldn't have been to go stand beside Cornell's tent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
True.
So, but none of this was touched. I mean, if it's raccoons, any forced animal for a free meal, they would go right straight to that. Nobody would argue with that. None of that was touched. Whatever it was came, stood next to his, and Cornell I said, man, why didn't you open your tent flap, stick your phone out, take a picture? He says, man, I just wanted it to go away. And he said, daylight, he said, I felt bad about it because that's why I flew down here for that reason. And then when he got there, he said, I was like the kid that the monster was coming out from under the bed, and I just wanted to go away. So anyway, a little bit of comedy to this. I said, well, whatever it was, it's gone. I'm going back to bed. Cordell, he goes, I'm not getting back in that tent. I said, well, where are you going to sleep? He goes, I don't care. He said, I'll sleep in the back seat of your truck. I got a truck with a 2-seater. And I said, well, it's full of camping gear. He said, I don't care. I'll sleep in the front seat. I said, okay, that's fine. Next morning, I'm always up crack of daylight. I get out and I look over at the front of my pickup, and you can see Cornell. He's sitting up in the passenger seat, and his sleeping bag is over his head. I thought, well, he got pretty cold. Of course, him being from Massachusetts, we're cold. We're not used to the temperatures you guys get that far north, and he's just wearing a hoodie. And he's not even complaining about the cold. But I watched him. I said, did you get cold? He goes, no. He said, you and Elijah got back in the tent. He said, I'm just looking at these windows around me and thinking, my God, what if it walks up and looks in at me? So he did that. But yeah, he's going to try to come back down here and go back to this area this year, hopefully. But yeah, I go to that area a lot. I do a lot of solo camping down there because I'm self-employed. I have a music store, and it's a lot easier just to, when I get a free moment, tell my son, I said, hey, watch the store. I'm going to the mountains and camping, and it's just easy. And honestly, I've camped down there by myself more than I have with other people. Not worried about Bigfoot. I've made this comment many times that if Bigfoot is out to get us, it's not very good at it.
True.
Generally, the only thing in those woods that concern me is if a person with criminal intent was to, see me going back in there and come back no good, which I'm always very, very well armed. I carry a sidearm, so I'm not an easy target, stuff like that. But no, I mean, if a bear come up and wanted to be obnoxious, I'd fire a shot in the air and make it run off, And the only couple of times I've seen a bear when I'm down there, they see me and they head the other direction.
Right.
Animal down there that will give you concern that you got to watch out for, the wild boar.
Right.
Because they generally, and every time I've been around them, they run, but they are unpredictable, especially if you come up on a sow with piglets. They can be quite obnoxious.
Well, we don't have them up here yet, but they're starting to make their way in here. I guess they're
terrible.
Yeah.
They got a lot of commercial hog farms down here in this part of the country, and they escape more times than they would lead you to believe. And they, a domestic pig, just after a little while being out in the wild, they start to take on the features of the razorback and stuff like that.
Basically, when you hit to the woods there, you let the Sasquatch find you rather than going out looking for it.
Well, technically, here's what I do. And this is what I tell people generally at this point in any interview. And I would say 99% of Bigfoot sightings, what are people doing? They're just going about their business. There'll be an accidental sighting of one running across the road. There'll be a sighting of somebody out camping or whatever, hear a noise, look up, they may catch sight of it. I basically go camping. Now, what I'll do in the daylight hours, I will, recon the area looking for any evidence like footprints, hair caught on branches, things like this. And then at night, yeah, I'll hike away from camp on the trails and just listen. But most of the time I sit and wait and listen and, see if any of these creatures are curious enough to come close.
One question I had for you is, I was watching one of your videos. It said you had been camping since you were roughly 12. Was that correct? Going out by yourself?
See, when I was younger like that, no, but see, I grew up in the country down there close to a little town called Calvin, Oklahoma. Now you can pull that up on Google Earth and see where it's at. Literally, our house is right up against the woods, and woods go for miles behind us, actually any direction. And I would, school friends or whatever, I was 12, 13 years old, especially during the summertime when we was out for, school break, we would just grab our backpacks and put some food in it and just take off walking into the woods and find a place to camp and set up camp, and I still kind of do that. I never outgrew that.
When did you notice Sasquatch? When did it come onto your radar?
As far as actively investigating,
well,
Sasquatch,
the first time you realized there's something out there other than just...
Well, my interest in it started very young with a gentleman. He was a veterinarian, doctor of veterinarian medicine, and my mom worked for him back in the 60s. I was born in 67, and she worked for him up till about 1972 or 3, I guess. And he had a copy of a book I grew up with his kids. His kids are a little bit older than me, but I grew up around them. He had that book by Roger Patterson, Do Abominable Snowmen of America Really Exist? And he had got that from Roger back in, the mid 60s. I think that book was written in 1965. And when I was a kid, I was just fascinated with that. So that's where my interest, started. Get some sweet tea, that helps. But anyway, that was my first introduction to it. And I was probably about 6 years old, I guess, when I started that. But anyway, I think the next thing I remember about that, other than that book, is Dr. Lewis Stiles was the veterinarian's name. And I would call him a healthy or a skeptic, but a hopeful skeptic. He didn't really, as a science-minded person, he didn't really see how something like that would be that credible and not be found, but he would still document any sightings that came from it. But when I was about 6 years old, he went to work, shut down his private veterinary practice and went to work for the federal government as a veterinarian. Like he would go to these different ranches and stuff to inspect their cattle to make sure they were, disease-free and stuff like that. But he moved deeper into southeast Oklahoma, close to Broken Bow, where he was raised. And we would go down there all the time. I spent a lot of time, fishing those creeks and stuff behind his house. But there was a report that made the newspaper. I'd probably be around 10 years old at this time. If somebody was out camping by, it's not really a lake, it's a slough, or you might call it a swamp. They called it Yonnaby Lake. You can't even get to it right now. It's set aside property for the state owns. It's like wildlife preserve, I think. But one of these creatures that come up to their camp at night, that actually made the paper. And I was just fascinated because up at that point I thought, well, these things are just up in Northern California, So I was like, wow, there may be some in Oklahoma. And of course I was, a 10-year-old that wanted to go out in the woods and look for these things.
Yeah, well, we got them out here in Ontario too. So
yeah, there's some other guy up there that got some kind of Ontario Bigfoot thing on YouTube.
You mean the one that's faker than hell?
The one that Bigfoot talks to him like this.
Yeah, that's the one.
French fried potatoes? How much you want for 'em? I reckon I'll have me some of the bacon.
So, I take it y'all's not affiliated.
No.
Yeah. I mean, if Bigfoot really is talking to him like that, I'll be. You know, I've never heard anything like that. But
Well, getting back to let's get back and maybe dwell on the chatter.
okay.
Personally, from what I've heard, sounded more like the samurai speech or the samurai chatter that Ron Moorhead gave. It was almost like somebody was playing it from the edge of the woodline. That's what I'm not sure if you've heard anything similar to that. So mostly just.
I think only one time have I heard something that really sounded very much like that, and it's the only time I'm pretty sure I caught a brief glimpse of one of these creatures. And I had been in a different area, not terribly far from one I was telling you about, but I was solo camping and I was getting a late arrival there. It was just about dark, and I was above the creek. The creek was below me, still a little bit of daylight, and I'm getting stuff out of the back of my truck, lawn chairs, stuff like that. And something caught the corner of my eye down from me and across the creek, and and I looked back at it, and it took off in the woods. And it wasn't that big, but it was 4 foot tall, if I'm guessing, little bipedal figure, and it was a grayish black in color. As soon as my eyes hit it, it shot off into the woods. Now, after it disappeared, I heard some of that chatter like that coming from two sides of where this thing ran into the woods. One from further up the opposite bank, and the other in answer on the same side of the creek as me, just further back. So, and that was both that and from one side of the creek to the other, that was that chattering type of sound. Now, after that, I didn't hear nothing else the rest of the evening. And you get back home, you're not spooked by any of it. I'm talking to one of my friends here. I said, well, maybe that was a couple of adults chewing out the young one from being careless and getting spotted briefly, But it was so brief. I probably didn't have it in my sight maybe a couple of seconds, just long enough to register it being there, Now, but other than that, that's the only time I can actually say I'm pretty sure that's what I probably saw, because I don't know what else it could have been.
I'm sure if that was some little kid running around in the woods, he must have been running around pretty fast, I'd imagine.
You mean like a little human kid?
Like a little human kid running around.
No, there's no way.
No.
Where I was at, there's no way. Because the other side of the creek, it went down the creek, and then past it up, it went straight up a cliff.
Yeah, that's what I was alluding to. It was doing something that a kid can't do.
Right.
As far as running.
Unless I just totally mistaked something different, I don't really know what else it could have been.
Yeah.
I've seen these things run from the side of the road. I had a road crossing at one time up in northern Ontario, and I caught one as I was driving down the road. I pulled over to the side of the road. This thing was running at a speed I've never seen anything run that. I ruled out the bear, ruled out a moose right away. All I seen was big shoulders and legs and arms swinging, but it was moving faster than a human. It was impossible to be a person on stilts in a monkey suit. So
right. So how big was the one you caught sight of? Your estimate?
Easily, at the very least, 8 foot.
Wow!
We're likely going to hit that area this summer. I'm hoping.
Oh, I don't blame you there.
Well, my first.
But
sighting,
you asked me when the last time I was actually out in the woods, though. It would have been October.
So generally, when you're going to be hitting the woods again in the spring?
Probably early to mid-March.
What's the temperatures like at that time down there?
Daytime, usually pretty good, 60s. But at night, down in the area that I've been to that last time, was down there in March. It got down in the 20s. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Of course, here right now, down here in Oklahoma, we've had below zero temperatures the last few days. It got up to 40s today, but I mean, we got some of you guys' air got down here. So,
well, We're down in southern Ontario. Basically, we're the Florida of Canada, basically. And
Oh, yeah.
we're not used to it. And I'm wearing my hat right now and a fleece because our heaters can't keep up the cold out here right now. That's how bad it is.
We
Wow.
set our furniture on fire too.
Not quite that far, but you guys get
Today's the first day the water thawed out here in my store. The last 3 days, the pipes have frozen here, which that hardly ever happens down here. I like a little bit of global warming down here right now.
Yeah, where's our climate emergency everybody's talking about here?
It's great.
Now, last summer, though, I tell you what, last summer, I didn't go out much of any because we had no spring last year. It went from winter. I think we had a week of spring type weather, and it went from there to 100 plus degrees and did not come back down till late.
Wow.
We had a miserable, one of the hottest summers on record here last year. It was miserable.
I don't know if you caught any of our forest fire smoke down south, heading down your way.
Really?
Spring, summer. New York.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we sure did. Yeah, we did.
Yeah, there was. We were up at this one investigation area, and we constantly get good activity up there. But the year that passed spring, we were up there, and it was just thick smoke everywhere. That's how bad.
There was a fire ban on at the time, and then we were up that one morning we were to leave, and it's like, who's got a fire going? There's smoke going through the trees, and yep, it was all the way driving right back down to Toronto. It was smoke right there.
Wow. Yeah, we were getting it down. We could see it down here. Mainly when you saw it was like closer to sunset down here. You could see it distorting the view there.
Gotcha.
Hey, you were mentioning the burn ban in October of 2022. That's when Will from Will Star Monsters and Mysteries, he came down here. That was during a burn ban. So we camped 2 nights down there with no campfire. And the moon was out bright. And one of the vocalizations, talk about that, we were sitting out there in the woods, just in lawn chairs, just listening. And something let out this horrendous scream behind us, like in the woods. And it made us both get to our feet. Because earlier we'd been listening to, owls. We've got several species of owl down here. But this was like, you could feel it reverberate through you. And we both kind of got up and he goes, "What was that?" I said, "That was not an owl."
Well, that's for sure.
9 foot tall owl, maybe.
Or whatever. Yeah, it's a neat place. But yeah, the chattering you were talking about, the time that I really heard a clear chattering of that type that sounded, close to what Ron Moorhead recorded there in the Sierras, was that time that I caught that glimpse of that smaller figure. Yeah, I had Ron on my podcast once. It's recorded there if you want to watch that. He's an interesting individual.
We've had him on our show too. He is awesome.
Oh, yeah. Man, I tell you what, if I live to be 80 years old, I hope I'm still in that good a shape.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know that I'm in that good a shape now.
You got an ATV to get around on?
No, I walk.
You're old school.
A lot of the places that, the one place I go down to, you're not supposed to take ATVs back in there.
Gotcha.
And plus, if you're on an ATV rambling around down there, you're going to miss so much as far as what you're listening to, and such as that. Some of these areas I will, drive in as far as I can, and then if I need to walk very far, I will. Most of them you can actually drive pretty deep into these areas.
Yeah, you got the other guys. What is it? The Watchsaw Mountains up there, where you have the other group that's investigating.
There's two mountain ranges that sound very similar to each other, but one's in the far southwestern part of the states. That's the Washita, spelled with a W. And then you've got the Wichita. Anyway, down in southeast Oklahoma, the Kiamichi Mountain Range is a sub-range of the Washita Mountains, which extend from there all the way into Arkansas. And they're, pretty big mountain range there. They go all the way over like Mena, Arkansas, over into that area. I'm not sure how much further than that to go, but they're pretty big. Actually, most of the Washita Mountains are on the Arkansas side.
Yeah, because there's another group called the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. You
Right.
know anything about those guys at all, or
Uh,
been in their area at all?
I was in one of their areas before they ever was. That's what they call Area X.
Right.
One of the guys that's the only member of that group that I was, briefly acquainted with was Alton Higgins. And I don't know if he's still part of it or not. He might have kind of retired from that, but he was a wildlife biologist, and he and I went down into that area. I don't know when they started calling it Area X, but that was a few years after we were down there. We went down into that area probably in 2000. There's some cabins down there. There's some people. You remember the whole Y2K thing? The world was going to end, Jesus was going to come back, and all that was going to happen. The computers were going to die. You remember all that?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Okay. Some people had actually built a couple of cabins down into this area, thinking if the world, fell apart, they could, go down there and kind of live off the land. And it's a very remote area. And what led us to that area in the first place, Alton and I were talking to, he was an older gentleman. He was a retired forestry worker there at Honubby, and saying, hey, where would be if you wanted to go to a really remote area that would have the best chance of maybe those things being? And he told us this area, and you don't just accidentally drive into this place. I mean, and really the way we went into it at that time, from what I understand, is not even a way you can get there now. Because I got a friend here that the UPS driver, and he bear hunts down in that area. He goes, no, you got to go a whole different route to get down into that area now. Yeah, that in NAWAC or what I think they call themselves, they were down in that area. And I think the most I found out about it, there's a gentleman wrote a book about them going down there and shooting at these creatures and stuff. And so I said, hey, I read about you in that book. I'm like, say what? I said, I don't know them. And they do mention me in it in one area of the book, but it's not entirely accurate. It's not anything bad or whatever. Alton is recalling getting on the roof of one of these cabins and sweeping off the litter off the top of it and sitting down. And he remembers that being me there. And I'm like, no, that was somebody else. I wasn't there, because in the book I wrote, there's a picture I took from on top of that cabin, and I'm by myself on it at that time. And I did not sweep any of the limbs and stuff off the top of it, so out that, they were remembering somebody else, down there, because when he was on that cabin roof, according to this book's recollection, they were hearing these things hitting things up against one of the other cabins and things like that. And when we were down there, the only evidence that me and Alton found is we found an old footprint in a dried up mud hole that was pretty good size. It looked like it could have been. But as far as the racket and stuff that they were hearing, that didn't happen when he and I were down there. Of course, he had, keep in mind, that's 24 years ago.
Yeah.
And he had been back down there several times with other folks. So, but anyway, the guy that wrote that book, and I can't remember the name of it, he was a NAWAC guy. And it's an interesting book. If I could remember the name of it, I'd tell you what it was so you could get it. It's something. The subtitle of it is Hunting Apes in Area X or something like that.
Okay.
But it's an interesting read.
Yeah.
Now, me personally, let me be very clear about this. I am not one that has any intention of shooting at one of these creatures.
Neither are we.
The only way conceivably I would take a shot at one is if it was trying to get me. And I think if it had that in mind, I probably wouldn't know it until it was too late.
That's true. I don't think there's anything big enough to take one down. And maybe an elephant gun or something like that. But
not to mention that, but in the book I'm talking about, they're talking about shooting into the woods where more than one of these are. And I'm like going, as remote as that is, if you actually brought one down, I don't know what your chances of getting out of there would be.
Yeah,
And
now
that's
getting out
that's
alive.
just me
Yeah.
thinking out loud there. And I'm not being critical of them whatsoever. I'm just going off what, was in the book. I would be very nervous about that.
I agree with you. I
I'll
don't
tell you, have you heard of a gentleman named Dr. Haskell Hart?
I'm not familiar with that name. No.
He, okay, the whole DNA thing going on with Bigfoot, there's Dr. Melba Ketchum, who's from down in Texas. Okay, she's got DNA samples that she took. And then Dr. Haskell Hart, he's, I think, a Harvard guy. I don't think they agree with each other on any of that stuff, but he actually was down in that area, and he actually had a sighting of one of these creatures that he recounts in his book about the DNA thing.
Wow.
So I think that's the hot spot,
Yeah.
but it's hard to get to.
Yeah. Well, it's good that somebody actually got a chance to look at it. That's collecting
Now,
the DNA.
have you read my book, Kiamichi Bigfoot?
I haven't got a copy of it yet.
Okay, well, if you get that, there's a chapter in it called Area X, and I'll recount the time that I went down in there and all and that there. And when I was there, the most interesting thing happened is one of these cabins was nestled up real close to the edge of the ridge that came down. It was in this valley, and you could get on top of it. And I crawled on top of it and was just listening, and something hit the pin beside me, and I thought, is that a stick falling off the tree? Which is very, there's twigs up there. And then when I had the light off, the pebble hit beside me. So I'm like, well, something's throwing pebbles up here. And you could kind of hear something kind of stealthily moving in the deep woods, but that's I don't call it evidence. That's a peculiar thing that happened when I was down there that particular time.
One thing that I've noticed is when we're in the area, we know that they're around. We'll get all the telltale signs. We'll get stones and pebbles tossed around. You hear them bouncing off the top of the car roof or something like that, or they're pinging these off the top of a roof of the cabin we're at. They are very careful about leaving prints. That's what I've noticed. They will not walk through the mud. They will not walk in an area where they could leave a print. That's what I've noticed. They're very careful on leaving any sort of trace of it. What's your thoughts on that? Do you find the same?
They're not very helpful, are they?
No. But I don't know if you're familiar with our camera trap program that we're gonna.
No, I'm really not. I think the first that I had heard of you guys was when you got in contact with me.
50 cameras that should basically stretch out in a interlocking grid pattern, which should reach anywhere from 400 meters up to 600 meters. That's our plan, and we're going to hang these at a higher level. Obviously, probably about 15 feet up. We're not out there to catch deer on camera, right? We're basically after the Sasquatch. So we're also going to cam these things up with a latex tree bark that will cover the whole camera like that. The only IR lights are completely shut off and disabled, so the only thing that's poking out of them are basically the passive infrared sensor and also the camera sensor. That's the only thing that's going to be exposed. It's going to be stapled up right against a tree with this like camouflage mask. That's what we're hoping to try that out.
It should be easily missed. We looked at a few photos of other people using this type of covering for the cameras, and you can walk by a camera without it on it and not see it. You're definitely not going to see it with this on.
I hope y'all have good luck with that.
Well, we're hoping, but
we'll see.
Now, speaking of the traps like that, you mentioned the NAWAC guys. They had put up some interesting, like, I'm sure you know a little bit, that some kind of tracking device they put in, like a cucklebird type deal, and where it would catch in something's hair, and something picked it up and they tracked it round and around that area. Whether it was a Bigfoot or not, I don't know.
Like an air tag type of thing, like a Apple air tag.
Yeah, they the book I was talking about, that Hunting Apes in the Area X, of course, they believe they're just an undiscovered ape. Personally, I don't, but that's fine. We don't really know. But they hung it like 6.5, 7 foot off the ground from what I remember from the book. And it was like do you know what a cuckleberry is?
Oh,
like
yeah.
horses get them in the mane. It was something like that, but it had a tracking tip in it where if something got it snagged in his hair and, walked off with it, they could, through their computer, track it. And something did to get one of that, and they tracked it in like a, couple of mile radius around that valley.
Yeah, I
Of
believe
course, that doesn't tell you what it is. It just tells you something snagged it and walked off with it. That's pretty interesting.
I believe, yeah, they picked up, I think it was Tag 7. That was the name of the podcast that they're referring to.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, they actually went up in an airplane. They hooked up the antenna to try and find it, and they picked up a signal. It was over top of another couple mountain ranges or something like that in the dead of winter, which basically probably rule out a bear because they should be hibernating at that time during the winter time. The only other thing it could have been was possibly a cougar, maybe. I don't know. Outline.
Mm.
Who knows? But how is it going to jump 7 foot up and tag itself?
Well, and why?
Yeah.
Plus, a mountain lion's fur is not really conducive to that kind of
You think?
snagging. But yeah, that's very interesting.
I find that.
So what do you guys think? Somebody backs you in the corner and says, "What do you think these things are?" What do you think?
That's a loaded question.
Actually, with me, it's not. I don't. Not loaded as much as it is. It's me. I like to hear what other people think.
Well, I like what you said earlier. You had mentioned that, well, they do have the desire to procreate. When it came to that one story from British Columbia where they impregnated that girl. So I don't know. To me, it's like I went along through the years thinking, okay, is it a Gigantopithecus lost ape? And then no. As I learned more and more and more, they can't be that. Nephilim, even then, it's hard to think that that's what they are. But if
gotta be creative.
What's that? You gotta be creative.
Gotta be creative to make that work.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I've actually wore a lot of hats. I've been to a seminary before. I've studied, scriptures and all that. As far to my knowledge, and I actually spoke to this fellow because I mentioned him in my book, and I never want to misrepresent him, so I call it to my knowledge, Scott Carpenter is kind of who come up with that. And in my book, Kiamichi Bigfoot Investigating the Oklahoma Sasquatch, there's one chapter it just says, "What is it?" I started with a disclaimer. I said, these are not necessarily my thoughts on it, but this is what some people think. And I just called Scott up. I've spoken to him several times. Of course, he passed away, last summer. But I called him up and I said, okay, where do you get this? Why? And how do the mighty men of old, the men of renown, turn into the hairy, hidden booger in the woods? And I said, and by the way, I said, are you the guy that come up with this? And he thought for a minute. He goes, I might be. But however you look at it, Scott's the one that gave that theory legs, if you will. But the Nephilim of Genesis 6 kind of corresponds with the Greek demigods and the stuff that would be from that time in history, if you will, because, in the Greek mythology, there were gods that came down and procreated with human women and made these hybrid races. In the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, you had these sons of God or angels that, for whatever reason, left their first abode, that were the watchers, that came down and done the same thing. And these were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. Could I be wrong whether that's, well, yeah, maybe, but I just don't. I think you got to be pretty creative to make Sasquatch Nephilim. And that's not me I'm not criticizing anybody that thinks that.
Yeah.
It's just from me. Then my criticism would be the same thing on Gigantopithecus. And I'd actually, Dr. John Bindernagel had actually came down to the Texas Bigfoot Conference, the very first one in 2001. And I got to sit down at a table with him, just me and him by ourselves, and talk for a while. And he and I were talking about that. And I refined my question that I asked him about the whole Gigantopithecus. And of course, people like him from the scientific community, like Dr. Bitternagel, Jeff Meldrum, and stuff, they're going to approach this from a scientific frame of mind of their training, okay? Which makes total sense. But Gigantopithecus was a big ape that lived in Southeast Asia, from what we know. All we've got of it, the fossil record, is a few teeth and a couple of jawbones, lower jawbone. They tend to resemble an orangutan. Nothing about that leads me to believe that they were a bipedal ape. Could be wrong. I'll put that disclaimer in there. But I'll always take it this, and I've said this at conferences when I'm talking about it. Animals will leave their natural area out of necessity, whether it be food, whether it be driven out. What would have caused Gigantopithecus to leave its area in southern Asia, go all the way thousands of miles north, cross the icy land bridge, where none of its natural food sources are? Because if it's like an orangutan, it's going to be a vegetarian. Come across this land bridge into a landmass that has absolutely none of its food it's used to eat. Could happen, but there would have been something very catastrophic to cause that kind of a migration. So that's why I think it's an unlikely. One reason I think it's unlikely that it would be a remnant of Gigantopithecus.
Well, I believe it to be some sort of human hybrid of some sort. That's what I believe. That's the thing that I am leaning up close to. They certainly watch us quite a bit. They certainly are interested in humans. They enjoy, I don't know if they enjoy, but they certainly like to watch.
Well, I think the evidence to my mind points to them being, I don't know if I would go so far to say a hybrid. I mean, if they have impregnated humans, yeah, there's some hybridization there. I would lean more towards another type of human. Maybe something evolved to a point that somebody says, well, why did they not evolve? I'm like, well, if they're already perfectly designed to exist in a natural habitat, they're not going to have that need to.
Mm-hmm. Well, they evolved in the way
whether
they
you believe
to.
in evolution or not. I'm not going to get into a religious discussion on that. But whether just take the theory of evolution or whatever, evolution would happen out of necessity, things changing and this changing and whatnot. So if these things are totally perfectly designed to exist in nature like that, there wouldn't be a necessity, genetically or otherwise. They've got to be smart enough to know that we're bad news, but they're just too darn curious to leave us alone entirely. That's just my thought.
Yeah.
And I think the evidence points to that. They are smart enough to know we're bad news because they avoid us, but they're so curious they do get seen once in a while.
That's correct. Now, that's the thing. Obviously, they have a better visual acuity during the night hour.
Yeah,
but
which makes sense.
But they also get caught during the daytime, so which seems to lean towards that. Obviously, they're better suited for night navigation or night movements, right? But they're still seen in the daytime, and that's where you can probably get a good sighting if you're lucky, if they're in the area or close to the area, that they sometimes screw up and get caught by somebody either horseback riding or hiking or whatever.
I just took a report from a gentleman here a few days ago. The sighting happened in 2008, but him and his daughter and a friend of theirs, there's 3 people witnessed this daylight sighting. It was about a block away from them, from the best he can estimate. They were working cattle in this wooded area here. There's a little pasture here. He said, we had just finished, working the calves and we're moving them out. They were on horseback, and this thing come running at the opposite end of the pasture down this wooded ridge and across the lower pasture from them toward the creek. And he said, they're all 3. They started riding their horses toward it going, do you see what I'm seeing? And they're all, his daughter and his friend, like, yeah. and they could ride up to the fence, and they stopped, and they said when it got to the bank of the creek, right at the edge of the woods where the creek, it stopped and it turned, and he said it was kind of looking like this kind of, he said, he described like, he said, you know how a deer does, you know, when they see and it stopped there right at the edge of the woods, and for a few seconds stopped and looked back at them, then went off down into the creek. That sighting took place not 20 miles from where I'm sitting right now. Another sighting from that same general area within a 10-mile radius of there happened further back than that, but a guy, and I know both of these people, okay? This guy was driving home one evening. He said it was still enough daylight to see, but he come around a corner on this dirt road and just in time to catch this Bigfoot walking off the other edge of the road and going into the woods. You know, he said he could tell the color. He said it was kind of a dark brown color. And he said same thing. He said, as it was going into the woods, it was looking over its shoulder at him. And these happened just right here. There's a local doctor here, and I'm in Ada, Oklahoma. Local doctor here that I've known for 30 years. Back in the late 1980s, same general area, driving at night, two of them crossed the road in front of him, very close to his vehicle. He said, I could see their face in the headlights as they went off the edge of the road. So, you know, that's...
Well, that was my first sighting as a child at 5 years old.
So both of you guys had a sighting?
I had multiple sightings.
I've had that one as a child for sure. And the other sightings for me were just like a head ducking behind a fence in the middle of winter, just eye shine. So if you count that, I don't know. But the one that walked across the road, daylight, like showing its teeth, like, oh, we caught it out. And it across the road in front of us, showed its teeth twice and right into the woods. And I was 5. The kid next to me was 6. The guy that was driving, my dad's best friend, he's now passed. So he'd seen a UFO, my dad told me, but he wouldn't even talk about that when I asked him. So I don't think he talked about that situation. But yeah, that was it. We saw it walk across the road in front of us. I don't know, 4 or 5 in the afternoon, summertime.
Wow, that's fortunate. How big was it? Do you remember roughly?
I was in between the seats of a Jimmy. I'm not sure what year that vehicle was, but my elbows were on the seats because there was no middle seat. It wasn't all the way across. It was a bench. And it seemed to be level with the car, the top of the vehicle, almost like in line with me. So 5-6 feet at the very least. I remember looking right in the eye of it. It seemed like we were going up a hill, though.
Mm-hmm. So both of you guys, your encounters were in Canada?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ontario area?
Yes.
Yeah. The very first time I laid eyes on one was I was canoeing up in the Temagami area, and my brother was in the bow, I was in the rear. We're paddling away, trying to be quiet, hoping to catch, some spotting of wildlife. And we paddled away, and I thought I was staring at a bear on my left side, on the south side, in a shaded area, on all fours, drinking water out of the lake. I told my brother, hey, look at the bear. There's a bear right over there. And he looks over, and he no sooner looked over at him, the thing turned around on all fours and started walking away on all fours like a bear. And then all of a sudden, very fluidly, it just popped back up bipedally and started walking right into the woods.
Didn't it give you a look, though? Did you think it was a look at you?
It didn't even look at it. I don't even think it cared we were there, because it just sort of walked right by and darted into the woods. There's no campsite there, nothing. It was just bush. And that was my first sight. And the thing, it was really weird. When the thing was walking, it was sort of like hunched over, almost like it had a bad back, because it looked like an old man, with his knees bent, walking away on his 2 feet. He almost looked better that he was walking on all fours, to tell you the truth, when he walked off. But he was covered head to toe in dark clothing, or that's what I thought it was at first. He had almost like he had a black balaclava right on top of his face in the middle of summertime. We're sitting in shorts, t-shirt. This thing's head to toe, black right out. His hands had gloves on. It almost looked like, soccer goalies. You know how big their catching gloves are? That's about the size of his hand. So it was
oversized hands. These are the things that stuck out first time I seen. But I didn't realize what I looked at many years later, probably about 10 years later. I realized after listening to other people's witness reports and go, man, that sounds a heck of a lot like what I've seen on that canoe trip. So I started piecing two and two together and figured out what I seen. And then I had a few encounters in my particular area up in Hastings County, and did a little web search. We found Daryl over there and started chatting. And next thing you know, we started investigating a couple other areas. And sure enough, they were there. You know, he had a stump thrown at him too. So that one.
Really?
That was 2021 October at Madoc, Ontario.
Well, you guys got a lot of wilderness up there.
Oh yeah,
A fair bit.
everybody's scattered against the U.S. border. That's where most people are.
Right.
Far enough south. We put up there again in just this last October, and I had a limb break within an hour of us being there. And Chris had caught something on the FLIR as well.
Yeah, we got two figures standing in a hydro line right away looking at us. But it was far,
Really? Wow.
it was far enough away that you can barely make it out.
Blobby.
Yeah, the further the distance with a FLIR, it gets obscured. Obviously, we don't have military grade stuff. This is just commercial stuff.
Yeah, I don't even have a FLIR. I'd like to have one, but I can't really justify spending money on it right now.
Oh, you should get one. It's worth it because you can use it around your house too. You see where all the leaks are,
Especially with the temperatures the way they are.
during the winter time. You know where you.
Yeah, I don't even want to see that right now.
But yeah, we catch them on FLIR and we catch them on night vision, digital night vision. So
Yeah, Chris got a pretty good shot of one walking past the camp at the Mowat location up northern Ontario, north of Parry Sound, if you're ever looking at a map. And yeah, he got one walking by. You can see that on the Hastings County Sasquatch channel.
we actually caught two of them. One was like peeking from behind a tree, and then a secondary one walked right in front of him. So
yeah,
we actually caught two on that.
That was
FLIR.
cool.
Yeah, so we got them up here too, but they're definitely not violent or anything like that. That's what we've noticed.
Yeah, a lot of the
Sensational.
things I've ran into, at least stuff that I've heard about down here, the supposed violent type encounters were all preceded by somebody shooting or shooting at one. But that would make me kind of have a bad attitude towards somebody too if they were shooting at me.
Yeah.
True.
And even the older reports, like the Mount St. Helens, they Canyon, up until the point where one of the miners shot one of these creatures and it fell off the cliff into the gorge. They had just seen them peeking at them like curiously. But when that happened, it was, it started bombarding the cabin and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I just, the idea of shooting one of these creatures is not even in my consideration.
I don't think anybody would get out alive anyways if you do take one down. So.
Well, I mean, to me, it's like, I would like to think we've come a little further than our old days where it's ooh, look, a really rare and incredible creature. Let's kill it.
Nobody's going to believe us.
That's not me, and I'm not anti-hunting and stuff, but if I'm going to shoot something or catch it, I'm going to eat it.
Yeah.
And Sasquatch ain't on the menu, so.
What do you think the Sasquatch eats down in your neck of the woods as far as what's the menu for them?
I would think they're omnivores like we are. There are reports I've heard of them, taking deer. Of course, all your reports, it depends on the credibility of the person. You're having, take somebody's word for it. But I would think they would eat anything a black bear would.
Right.
Just not enough
berries
hogs. Just not enough hogs.
Hogs. Yeah, they're down in northeast Texas, down there by Louisiana. Yeah, there's reports of these things taking hogs.
Yeah.
There was a report, and I remember it because we were on vacation. We were driving down to the Texas coast through the area of the East Texas Louisiana border, and there was a report that made the papers of I think a logger down there going into some pine forest and saw one of these things carrying a body of a pig, a wild pig over his shoulder. So, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, they when there's plants that are edible out, they would take advantage of that, and they got to have protein too. So,
well, here's another.
I think they probably would do what.
We made one strange observation up one particular area, well, the Moa location that we're at. We would find, like this is a hunt camp, by the way, and we would find little piles of rocks, almost like they've had a little ammo dump, I guess, if you will, from the edge of the forest. They'll have a small pile of rocks laid out, maybe 4 or 5, maybe sometimes more. And here's another weird thing. We found corn cobs laying in the edge of the woods. Now, it's particularly strange because there's no, you can't grow corn up in this particular area because the soil is so shallow anyways. There's no cornfield, so start to scratch your head. It's like, all right, where'd they get the corn from? Either they dug it out of somebody's garbage somewhere, possibly. I don't know, but yeah, we found like a pile of corn cobs out in the middle of nowhere where there shouldn't be. I don't think a squirrel would take it. Travel
right,
hundreds
and I've actually found those little piles of rocks down there. I've never equated it to Bigfoot, simply, at least on my end down here when I found it, just because the little piles of rocks I found were most likely a person on the creek doing it. I didn't find any other evidence to lead me to believe otherwise on that.
Yeah.
Now, if I found a Sasquatch footprint close to it, that would certainly do.
Yeah.
Or if they were really, really big rocks,
Yeah.
But I don't know, I mean, we could be. I mean, I believe in documenting whatever evidence you find. You can always discard it later or say, hey, that's something. We're all trying to figure this thing out, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what we're touching base with you and compare notes.
But it sounds like you guys experienced a lot of very similar things that I do down here with some of that behavior.
I think so.
The thing about the throwing small rocks and stuff in our vicinity, that seems to be a pretty common theme, if you will.
Yeah.
And like the one I was talking about, and I even caught it on sound on camera. I had this was when Will was down the last year in 2022 in October. I had my camera. I have a little cheap camera with night vision, and we'd been walking, and I still had the thing on when that rock, you can hear it kind of hit in the leaves and bounce, a time or two. And of course, that's more for me. Anybody else watching it could say, well, y'all staged that. Well, we didn't, and we were there. And Will, he was like, why do they do that? And I'm like, man, there's $1 million question. Maybe to see what we would do,
I think so. Trying to get a rise out of us.
Yeah, definitely get our attention. Like, hey, we're here.
How about the Ohio Howl? Have you heard anything like that along that lines?
Not like that, no.
We certainly have.
Not close anyway. Not close enough I could say, hey, that wasn't a canine or something like that. But most of the vocalizations that I have heard consist of those whoops and whistles.
Yeah.
And in strange kind of whistle, like not like coming across the lips, more like through the teeth or something from deeper. I mean, it's just strange like that.
Now, some of the
and like I said, occasional that chattering, what they call samurai chatter, very rarely. It is really that one time is the only time I can really distinctly remember that. But the whoops and whistles seem to be the most common vocalizations that I have heard myself.
Now, we've had one witness come forward, and he was interviewed by another group that they found him to be pretty credible. He was out hunting or something to that effect, and he actually viewed a Sasquatch making those, quote, wood knocks, but they're using it with their mouth or with their, I guess they're
Louder, much louder.
Yeah, it's like, I guess using
I've heard that too. I think I interviewed somebody once, and that's what their thought was. And me, I'm like, it could be all of the above.
Yeah.
One time down in this area, I was about halfway up the ridge on a campsite, and I heard wood knock up above me. And a little bit later, it was answered from down in the creek bottom below me. Clearly something clacking a couple of rocks together. Mm-hmm. That went back and forth a little bit.
Right.
Now, if the wood knock was made with the thing's mouth or clacking his teeth or something, maybe so, but what was coming out of that creek bottom was definitely and obviously something clacking rocks together.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, if you got now that having somebody, an eyewitness that you deem to be credible actually visually seeing this creature make that noise, that's a gem right there now.
Yeah. I wish they had it on camera too.
Yeah,
That would've been
but yeah, I mean, if you have somebody and they see it making that knocking noise with its mouth, I mean, can't argue with that. That's how they were doing it.
It's
Well,
unheard of.
Nobody's actually seen them like carrying a club or a baseball bat and start whacking a pine tree or something. Like that.
No,
I don't believe they do that at all. So I've heard them as
now that that being said, they
Yeah.
apparently have opposable thumbs, so they could if they wanted to.
I guess they could, yeah. But at the same time, I can't see them like smacking a piece of wood against the tree to make that noise because there's no way you can make a loud knock. We've all heard knocks as loud as gunshots for that matter. You ain't going to do that with a piece of wood. There's no way because we heard knocks that you could have sworn that was a gunshot, but we don't get the echo back. But loud enough to be as loud as a gunshot.
Well, if you get a chance, go over to the No Such Thing podcast and find the video that's just audio that Cornell took from that recorder out in the woods, and listen to some of that because he's got a really good wood knock on that, and these sounds were after we were asleep.
Yeah.
It would have been leading up to the point where something come beside his tent and he woke up.
Gotcha.
It would have been, looking back, maybe they were signaling to each other, coming closer to camp. Hey, there's sleep. Let's nose around and see what we can find.
Other than that, in closing, Dave, what other tips would you give somebody as far as going out and being successful?
Well,
in documenting it.
sounds like you guys have been a lot more successful than me. You also had clear sightings. So
Okay.
should be you giving me the tip. But
All right,
I'll just tell you what I do. I agree. Ron Moorhead made the comment that you don't find them, they find you. I agree with him 100% on that. And basically what I do is just like I said earlier, I go to a location, I recon the area during the daytime, and then just pay attention after dark and listen.
Gotcha.
And I will go hike around after dark sometime just because I don't like to just sit still and do nothing. But mainly just pay attention to your surroundings when you are camping. Go about your business because that seems to be when most people actually have a sighting. Yeah.
Pretty much. Well, Dave, I think we're getting late in the hour. I'm sure you're hungry. You need to get home and get some dinner.
Yeah, go home and I live 30 miles from here. I live 30 miles from town. So I live kind of out in the middle of nowhere myself.
Well,
Far enough, my internet's terrible out there, and I stay after work to do my podcasts and interviews.
well, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining us.
I
there.
enjoy it.
All right. Well, this has been Hastings County Sasquatch. Chris and Daryl, back at you from Ontario, Canada, with David Willbanks.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks for having me.